So this Torah portion, Bereshit, the first Torah portion of the cycle, is without doubt the most commented upon Torah portion we have. In fact, I think the first word, Bereshit, is probably the most commented upon word by itself in all of the Torah, because it's actually not a proper word. It's not proper grammar. And this Torah portion, how many of you got the Torah talk or got a chance to read that? Hopefully it was a different take on things, because this is also a Torah portion that teaches us how to manifest in our lives. But this Torah portion goes from creation through the 6 days, the seventh day, Shabbat, creation of man and woman, this issue of happening with this tree and this fruit and this serpent, all the way through 10 generations where we start not doing so well. It's where Methuselah lives 900 years. All sorts of things happen in this. And, we generally, as rabbis, we generally talk about God creating the universe and how he created it or why he created it. We talk about how God created the universe, therefore he can give it whatever he created to whomever he wants. We talk about man and woman. I'm going to do a quick man and woman teaching just because I want to. Carolyn, Alan, can I borrow the two of you up for a second? When God first creates the human being is called Ha-Adam. Come on up here. It's called Ha-Adam, the human being. And we teach that Ha-Adam, if you could go back to back, please. Okay, there you go. That Ha-Adam looks kind of like this, which is one side's male, one side's female, connected at the back rib. Okay, so one of you who have ever heard that women should be subservient because Eve was created after Adam, you can tell whoever said that to you that they're full of not nice things. Okay, because it's actually not true. Ha-Adam is created in our tradition, the human being that is male and female, but it's kind of lonely because they can't talk to each other. So God puts them to sleep. Sleep. Thank you. I'll be here all week. Try the nachos. Splits them at the rib, turns them around, and now you have Adam and Eve, and they're so happy. Thank you. Okay, off with you. So I say that only because I think it's so important that we remind ourselves that woman did not come from man, that actually the creation was of one being. But, we hear all these stories. How many of you have heard different stories from Bereshit, from Genesis, the beginning of it, right? And I think there's a character that really gets left out a lot that isn't get talked about. The serpent, exactly. First of all, the serpent's not evil. It says the serpent is the most cunning. He's also the most jealous. So the Midrash teaches us that the serpent, who at that time stood on 2 legs, that the serpent was jealous of Adam and Eve. Why? Because he could smell the love they had between them. He could sense it. And he was jealous. And so he goes and he does what we all know he does, but let's look at it a little deeper. God says to Adam, he says, Adam, you should not eat of the fruit of this tree. Sound familiar to everyone? Okay. And then when the serpent comes to Eve, the serpent says, Eve, have you been told not to eat of this tree? And she says, I have been told not to eat it, nor to touch it. Where'd she get that from? God didn't say don't touch it, right? God said don't eat it. This is what becomes known as a male's overprotective qualities backfiring. Okay? So he wants to tempt Eve. He wants to get them out of the Garden of Eden. And Adam, being protective and loving, he tries to protect Eve. He says, just to make sure you don't eat it and you don't touch it. But that's not what God said, is it? And sometimes being overprotective, I'm looking at all of the ones whose parents are in the room with you. Sometimes, like me, son. Oh, good. Knox is now just coming in. You're safe, Rena. Sometimes parents can be overprotective, can't they? Husbands can be overprotective. Anybody can be overprotective, and it backfires. And that's what happens here. The serpent knows. He's been listening very closely to what Adam and Eve, to their dialogues, because he's been entranced by the smell of love. He's wanted to be as close to them as he could be. And he's very, very cunning. And he hears Adam say, don't eat it, Eve, and don't touch it. Now, this becomes a practice of the rabbis. And I'll just digress for a second. the rabbis create what is called a fence around the Torah to protect the Jews. So my favorite example of a fence around the Torah is there's meat. We can eat meat, right? You can eat dairy, and then there's parv, which is neutral, right? And parv can go with either. And the idea is that meat is something that you can milk because it comes from the law, you shall not boil a calf in its mother's milk. So shouldn't a chicken be neutral like a fish? Because last I checked, you can't milk a chicken, right? It's true. But 1,000 years ago, the rabbis determined that the Jewish people were too stupid to tell between a burnt piece of chicken and a burnt piece of meat. So to make sure they weren't eating meat when they thought they were eating chicken, they decided to consider all fowl part of basar, part of meat. I have a friend, Rich, who keeps kosher, with the exception of he will eat chicken parmesan whenever he can, because he says, I know the difference between a chicken and a cow. So it's a rabbinic law, and we try and protect things that way, okay, so that we create a fence. Well, that's what Adam tries to do. And in comes the serpent, and Eve says, I'm not supposed to eat it, I'm not supposed to touch it. And you know what the serpent says? He says, hey, that ain't so, little lady. That's just not the way it is. And she goes, no, that's what God said. And the serpent, being very cunning, goes up to Eve, and he pushes her. This is what the Midrash teaches. He pushes her, and she bumps into the tree. And she doesn't die. And the serpent says, see, I told you it won't so. I told you, you were safe. And clearly you're safe from touching it, so therefore you must be okay if you eat it. And so she eats it. And we know where that leads. But then there's another big question that comes up, and this is the important issue as well, that we learn from this whole serpent incident and this fruit incident. But by the way, it was not an apple. There are different commentaries. It might have been an etrog, it might have been a fig, it might have been a pomegranate, but it certainly was not an apple. There are no apples in that part of the world, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So now let's look at Adam. Adam was told by God directly, don't eat the fruit. And yet, and he knows not to, right? I mean, this isn't secondhand information, he knows. And yet he does. Why? A concept called shalom bayit, peace in the house. It is more important to have peace with your spouse even than to listen to God directly. Adam gives up the Garden of Eden. You know what's great is when I'm looking at a husband and wife and you're both looking at each other like, see? And so even when God says it, it's more important to have peace in our home, isn't it? Because that's really where we find God. And from this, we learn that the Garden of Eden is always with us in every home, especially on Shabbat. We also learn about the cunning of the serpent and how we need to listen carefully, be really, really aware with each other for peace in the house. And also, we need to listen to the skeptics. Now, right now, this country and this world seems filled with skeptics. Either you are skeptical that the virus can be prevented by a vaccine. You're skeptical of anyone who's not taking a vaccine. You're skeptical of anyone who's had the coronavirus. You're skeptical of how good a vaccine is or is not. But it seems like what's happened is that there are a lot of people arguing with a lot of other people, aren't there? But they're through their skepticism. Well, that's the work of the serpent. What we need to remember is shalom bayit. Meaning, you and I can disagree and still respect and care for each other. We need to come together in that way. We need to have respect for each other. That doesn't mean if you're not comfortable with someone who is in whatever condition and you don't want to be around them, then don't. But we don't need to ever castigate another human being, do we? Because when we do that, we're like the serpent. Whenever we make that other into such an enemy, we may be cunning, but the only thing that we're manipulating is ourselves. We need to bring peace, shalom bayit, into our homes, into our families, into our communities, into the world. We need to stand strong for what we believe. And we need to be aware of that skeptic who says, that's not true, that's not true. Until we, God forbid, could become like the Acher, the rabbi who believes in nothing in the Talmud, because he has become so skeptical, he becomes an epikuros. He believes in nothing. We need to remember to have faith over fear in every moment. My prayer for all of us as we enter this new year, my prayer for all of us in this week, and as we go on, is that we choose not to be a skeptic. We choose not to deny faith and freedom and love, but instead we choose to embrace respect and caring, and in so doing, create peace. Amen. Benny, you got a song? We're really missing Matt tonight for this.
Shalom Bayit kind of sounds like an Israeli soap opera or something like that. It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible ain't necessarily so. Little David was small, but oh my. Little David was small, but oh my. He fought big Goliath, who laid down and died. David was small, but oh my. What do? Scotty Warrior. Oh, Jonah, he lived in a whale. Oh, Jonah, he lived in a whale. Well, who made his home in that fish's abdomen? Oh, Jonah, he lived in a whale. Little Moses was found in a stream. Little Moses was found in a stream. He flowed on the water till old Pharaoh's daughter, she fished him, she says, from that stream. What do? Now I'm Scouty Wow. Yeah. It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. Oh, Methuselah lived 900 years. Oh, Methuselah lived 900 years. Well, who calls that living when no gal be given to no man? What's 900 years? It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. I'm preaching this sermon to show it ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so.
That was beautiful.